This is the story of Pan Am Flight 214. On the 8th of December 1963, a Pan Am 707 was on its way from San Juan with a stopover at Friendship International Airport, Maryland, and then it would make its way to Philadelphia International Airport. On board were 73 passengers and 8 crew members. Before the plane even left the ground from San Juan, the captain was briefed about the weather that he could expect along his flight path. He was told to expect thunderstorms as he passed by Baltimore and Philadelphia. Flight 214 departed San Juan at 4:10 p.m. and reached Baltimore at 7:35 p.m. The plane was refueled and it was ready for its next leg to Philadelphia. Flight 214 departed Baltimore at 8:24 p.m. with the crew keeping a close eye on the weather. As Pan Am Flight 214 got closer to its destination, the plane was handed over to Newcastle Approach Control, who was not equipped with radar, by the way. Flight 214 was asked to maintain 5,000 feet, and they were cleared to the Newcastle VOR. By 8:42 p.m., the plane was at the Newcastle VOR, but the controller did not have good news. A cloud bank was present between 700 and 800 feet. Visibility was less than ideal, and it was raining. Making matters worse for the crew, it was windy. Winds ranged from 20 knots to 30 knots. Philadelphia was under the grip of a thunderstorm that the crew had been warned about. The controller let the crew know that they had about 5 planes in a holding pattern. They had elected to hold till the weather eased up a bit. The controller left the final decision up to the crew. They could push through the bad weather and make an approach right now, or they could wait around a bit until the weather improved. The crew elected to hold west of the VOR. They wanted the weather to calm down a bit. They expected to be out of the holding pattern by 9:10 p.m. At 8:50 p.m., the crew let the controller know that they were ready to make an approach to Philadelphia. The controller asked them to stay in the holding pattern for just a little bit longer. The crew replied with, "Roger, no hurry, just wanted to let you know that we'll accept a clearance." The controller went back to his duties. 8 minutes later, a panicked voice came over the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Clipper 214 out of control. Here we go." A quick burst and then silence. The alarm controller then got another transmission. Not from Clipper 214, but from the first officer of National Airlines Flight 16, another plane that was in the holding pattern. National Airlines Flight 16 was 1,000 feet above Flight 214, and they had a front row seat to what was unraveling in front of them. The first officer of National Airlines Flight 16 said, "Clipper 214 is going down in flames." The first officer watched as the plane plunged into the dark night. 99 people on the ground backed up the first officer of National Airlines. They too had seen a flaming plane in the skies of Elkton. At 8:59 p.m., the plane impacted the ground east of Elkton, Maryland. Unfortunately, no one survived. The once mighty 707 was now reduced to metal fragments in a 4-mile-long patch of land in Elkton. They sifted through the wreckage hoping that it would tell them something about the plane. They found the CVR, but it had been compacted by the 200G force of impact, double what it was designed for. They found the trailing edge of the left horizontal stabilizer, where they noticed something strange. The horizontal stabilizer was damaged, but not in a way that the crash would have damaged it. The paint on the stabilizer was blistered, and it was smeared with molten aluminum. They looked at the right horizontal stabilizer. It was damaged too, but not like this. They looked at more wreckage from this part of the plane. The left side of the vertical stabilizer and the aft fuselage were damaged in a similar way. They kept seeing the same damage pattern on more fragments. The inboard side of the flaps on the left side, spoilers, and a lot more. Flight 214 was burning, and it was burning hot. So hot that the in-flight fire was able to melt aluminum and send it flying into the airstream where it got smeared on the left side of the plane. They kept going through the wreckage. They got word that not all of the wreck was at this one main wreck site. The intact left wingtip had been found along with the left outer aileron. The left wingtip was about 1.8 miles southwest of the main wreck. At first glance, the wingtip was in better shape than the rest of the plane. It still had its structural spars jutting out, indicating that something had ripped the wingtip off the rest of the wing. Because this was so far from the rest of the crash site, this had to be one of the first pieces to come off the airplane. A broken wingtip and in-flight fire. Investigators were beginning to piece together what Pan Am Flight 214 went through in its last few minutes of flight. But what they found next was shocking. Literally. The left wingtip was studied. It had markings on it that were very strange. On the top part of the wing, they saw marks along the ribs of the wing structure. The same kind of damage could be seen from the trailing edge of the wingtip till about 3 feet from the leading edge of the wing. The rivets in the wing were molten. They found a hole an inch wide in the wingtip that had been subjected to intense heat. So much heat that the metal around the hole had fused together. The wing was peppered with molten metal and tiny holes. To the investigators, it was clear what they were looking at. Lightning damage. Flight 214 had been struck by lightning. Not everyone was convinced, though. Planes fly a lot, and they often fly through thunderstorms and bad weather, so much so that each plane on average is struck by lightning twice every year. Other planes have had no issues, so what made Flight 214 so special? For that, we have to look at the fuel system of the 707. The 707 had 4 main fuel tanks, 2 reserve tanks, 1 center tank, and 2 surge tanks at the left wingtips. If the plane were to climb or descend really quickly, there would be a pressure difference between the fuel tanks and the atmosphere. So, the 707 and other large planes had a vent system in place. The vent system fed into the surge tanks. The surge tanks were small 5-gallon tanks that collected fuel from the vent ducts. Once the plane had stabilized, the fuel would flow back into the tanks by means of a check valve. However, if the tank were to fill up with fuel, the fuel would flow out via a surge tank vent duct. They looked at the surge tank on the left wing. It was intact except for a 2.2-inch tear in the tank on the top along the vent passages. The skin around the vent was curled up, indicating a force from inside ripped it open. Likewise, the bottom of the surge tank was curled outward, and the inside of the surge tank was full of soot. They had found their smoking gun. They laid the wing out in a hangar and took electrical and magnetic measurements. Parts of the wing were highly magnetic as opposed to a regular 707 wing. Now, the investigators had to answer 3 questions. Did the surge tanks have fuel in them? Could a lightning strike cause an explosion? And how flammable was the fuel? A direct lightning strike could ignite fuel vapors inside the tanks of the plane. In fact, all it takes is a small spark. Case in point, TWA Flight 800. In that case, a short circuit inside the fuel tank ignited the vapors that had built up in the tanks. The 747 was lost. A direct strike could produce sparking inside the tanks. To understand if the surge tanks had fuel in them, the investigators, along with Boeing, took to the skies with an identical 707. They put the plane through its paces, putting it through varying phases of flight. They found that fuel was not vented from the surge tanks, but fuel did enter the surge tanks during flight. So the surge tanks on Flight 214 may have had fuel. Now, all the surge tanks needed was a spark, and what it got was a lightning bolt. The 707 was designed to run on 2 types of fuels, Type A and Type B jet fuel. The flammability of jet fuel depends upon 2 factors, the temperature and the pressure, or in aviation terms, altitude. Type A jet fuel is very flammable from 110 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level, which meant that Type A jet fuel is flammable in this region of this altitude temperature graph, whereas Type B jet fuel burned at a lower temperature, that is, in this region. Flight 214 had been fueled up in San Juan with a mixture of both Type A and Type B fuel, which meant that the fuel in Flight 214 was flammable over this whole range of temperatures and pressures. Now we have a clear idea of what went wrong on the 8th of December 1963. As Pan Am Flight 214 orbited near Elkton, waiting for the weather to clear up, the air above them crackled with electricity. The charges built up to such high levels that the air became a conductor, and a lightning bolt arced towards the ground. Unfortunately for Flight 214, it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lightning struck the left tip of the wing of the 707. We're not sure about the exact mechanism of how the lightning ignited vapors in the surge tank, but it did, and the surge tank exploded. After the initial explosion, the pilots were able to keep the plane under control for a few seconds. The wing was full of fuel, and it failed, and the plane began to dive. As it dove, other fuel tanks ruptured, one after the other, as they were all interconnected. This is when the horizontal stabilizer was peppered by molten aluminum. The crash was a wake-up call to the industry. The 707 that went down adhered to all lightning-related safety standards at the time, and yet it was struck down. During the hearings for this, crash experts underlined the need for more studies and tests to better understand how lightning affected airplanes. Changes were made. Studies had shown that lightning strikes on particular parts of the plane could generate sparks inside the fuel tank. Those areas were better shielded. The FAA ordered static electricity dischargers to be installed on more airplanes. When lightning strikes an airplane, there's raw power behind it, but the plane gets charged, and this can induce currents and magnetic fields in the plane. This can mess with the electrics of the plane. So, today's airplanes fly with double or triple redundant systems, just to be extra safe. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. A big thank you to Flight Bros FT for letting me use their amazing Pan Am footage on my video. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe.